The night the city thought it had closed its doors on drama, Luna turned a hospital corridor into a stage for the kind of desperation that makes everyone around you hold their breath and check their locks, and in one furious, terrifying sweep, she rewrote the rules of who could be safe and who would pay. It started like a story you expect from soap headlines. Luna, in labor, cuffed at the wrist, flanked by officers, a chain of responsibility wrapped around her like a mandate. The police were certain she would be processed, watched, held until the baby was born, and whatever came next could be handled with paperwork, protocols, and court hearings. The officers kept their eyes, their radios, their procedures. Luna kept something else entirely, a quiet, simmering plan that had nothing to do with being compliant and everything to do with surviving. In the lull between shifts, in the tiny second when an officer walked into a supply room and another officer answered a call about a different ward, Luna acted. It wasn't supernatural or cinematic in a neat way. It was an exploit of human fallibility, a breath, a slackened cuff, a shoe untied, a gait that must be masked by exhaustion. She moved like someone who had rehearsed escape 1,000 times inside her head and finally found a rhythm that worked in reality. Nobody was supposed to succeed. Luna did. She slid from the hospital bed like a shadow, slipped past jaws set in surprise, and in the raw seconds, when a radio crackled and feet moved and officers realized, she vanished into the night with the newborn tucked against her chest, a tiny, bewildered life cradled to a woman whose decisions had become storms. The city spun into motion. Alerts, calls, an immediate manhunt expected. But Luna did not run to hide. She ran to take control. She didn't flee alone for anonymity or pity. She fled with a purpose that was as sharp as the blade she would use moments later. She went directly to Will. Will has always been the kind of man whose name appeared in other people's storms. Loyal, sometimes careless with emotional boundaries, a symbol of family ties tangled in turbulent loyalties. When Luna found him, it was not random. She had learned who would be there in a crisis, who would listen before considering whether to run, and who, by the pockets of their conscience or the creases of their fear, could be bent into doing what she needed. She arrived at his door with cold water in her eyes and a small, furious thing sleeping against her heart, and when Will opened the door, the shock in his face was immediate and human and raw. Luna did not beg. She did not plead for a lawyer or for mercy. She moved like someone who had already rehearsed every word she might say, and when the blade found the soft line at Will's throat, the room's oxygen seemed to evacuate. It was a violent punctuation to the labor of her escape, a single, unbearable sentence of threat that compressed weeks of fear and fury into one decision. She would not be hunted. She would not surrender if the world would not let her go quietly. She would carve a path through it and drag everyone she needed along. Holding Will hostage was not simply an act of malice. It was her reclamation of agency. It was terrifying and dangerous and wrong in ways that made the heart race and the teeth clench. But within Luna's mind, it made sense. Keep the person most connected to Bill nearby. Keep leverage close. Demand what she needed most: passports, safe passage, the machinery to get far away with her child in silence. Bill, for his part, woke to a nightmare that editorial headlines could not soften. He arrived at Will's place to the sight of his son's cheek pressed to the knife and the wild, unblinking face of Luna, demanding that he assemble an escape that would satisfy her enough to spare Will's life. Bill's fury was immediate and volcanic, but fury had to be measured against the bigger ledger of stakes. For all of his business acumen and bluster, Bill felt a cold pebble of helplessness. An impulsive, dangerous woman, newborn in arms, a blade, a hostage, and time trickling while law enforcement mobilized. Anything more rash, anything that appeared to endanger Will further would be counterproductive. So Bill, whose life had taught him to move mountains with phone calls and favors, became an unwilling architect of Luna's flight. He called in resources, made arrangements, leveraged contacts. He did what desperate men do when threatened with a personal catastrophe because he cared for Will and because, In those hungriest moments of fear, doing nothing felt like burying his son. He prepared passports, arranged for transport, gathered funds, organized logistics. The story of exactly how he did those things doesn't belong in handbooks or how-to manuals. It belongs in awful, breathless recollections of people who watched their certainties fracture and tried to glue them back together with whatever power they still possessed. Will, strapped to the bedrock of fear with the knife's menace at his neck, tried to reason with Luna. He begged. He reasoned. He tried to remember the woman who had been lost inside, everything she had endured, and to tell her, gently, that violence was not the path to safety. He tried to reach the part of Luna that had once, perhaps, been scared and tired in a way that did not make her dangerous. Luna, however, was not accessible to reason. She was a woman who had been pushed into a corner so narrow that survival took on a new grammar. She wanted control over the outcome, and the only calculus she trusted was the one where her child and she could disappear beyond the reach of the people she feared, be they law enforcement, vindictive relatives, or the inevitable traffickers of gossip and judgment. Each plea Will offered swayed her a fraction, and each small concession from Bill hardened her resolve. Passports would be ready, a plane would be arranged, funds would be made available. And when she had what she wanted, the release of the hostage would come. For Will, the experience was a long compression of terror, the blade at his throat, the baby's random muffled sounds somewhere in the apartment, Bill's voice outside alternately begging and bartering, the police scrambling in the background and simultaneously constrained by a lack of leverage. No rescue was simple. Negotiations at times allowed small human moments while telling Luna that her child deserved a world where fear was not the inheritance, Bill pleading with her to let a legal path be found, an officer whispering into his radio and trying to find a way to end the standoff without blood. But Luna kept her fingers steady. She would not trust promises of safety. She trusted only completed acts, baggage packed, documents in hand, a plane's manifest that had space for a woman and a newborn and a single, terrified man who would soon be freed. As the deadline approached, the air thickened. Luna watched the city through bright, dangerous eyes. She watched family members scramble and plead. She watched the system grind and say, quietly but definitively, that catching her before she left would be difficult. She did not tell anyone everything. She kept certain thoughts, plans, and fears to herself. The baby, small and fragile, remained her lodestar and the source of every decision she made, however horrific it seemed to others. She had been convinced, in the raw world she inhabited now, that the only acceptable outcome was a new life in a new place where the past could not bleed into the present. Bill complicit by reluctance and fear-arranged last-minute documents and a rapid trip. For readers of this drama, it is critical to remember that Bill's involvement didn't make him a villain. It made him someone whose decisions were driven by the inconvenient fact of a son in peril. He put the weight of his influence behind a desperate hope that getting Luna out of town would end the immediate threat to Will and allow the law to untangle the mess later. Whether or not that moral calculus will stand in court or in the court of public opinion is not what mattered in that freighted hour. Will's life had to be spared first. Luna's departure was organized with the cold efficiency of someone who had embraced her desperation, and on a gray, tense morning she moved forward with the plan. The airport was a flurry of faces and ideas and the smallest of hesitations. Luna, pushing through the hubbub with the baby in her arms, and Will freed only after she confirmed the plane's imminent takeoff, boarded with the brittle calm of someone both terrified and elated. Bill watched from a distance, furious and hollowed out, the way only a father or a man who loves his child can be when the instruments of his wealth have been repurposed under duress. Police swarmed, but they were a beat too slow. Luna stepped onto the plane and took a seat, a fold of life and law and consequence pressed close to her. Will was released at last, shaken, weeping, relieved, forever altered. Officers questioned, neighbors gossiped, and the city tried to process how a woman in shackles one evening could vanish on a plane the next morning with a life that belonged to everyone else now in her hands. What happens after ascent is messy and full of possibilities, and the story refuses to end cleanly. Luna's flight across borders is a point at which the narrative could bifurcate into many outcomes. She could have succeeded and landed in Europe, sunk into an expatriate existence, built a new life under a new name, and become a hard one. Watchful mother determined never to let anyone seize her child again. She could be caught on foreign soil as international warrants and Interpol notices converged, dragged back into a courtroom where custody and crime and mental health would form a jagged battleground. She could disappear into the underworld networks that shelter those who flee, always looking over her shoulder and never truly at peace. Or she could, in a cruel twist, lose the very thing she kidnapped the world to keep falling prey to the darker forces of smugglers, manipulators, or simply the erosion of a life built in fear. Whatever the concrete outcome, the domestic fallout in Los Angeles is immediate and poisonous. The Forrester family reels from the shame and the threat. Will's trauma scars relationships. The tabloids circle like vultures, and Bill's conscience eats at him despite the relief he feels that his son is safe. There are legal consequences to untangle, questions about culpability and collusion to be answered, and a child whose origins remain a lightning rod of scandal and devotion. Luna's decision to hold a knife to Will's throat has altered many lives forever. She has both shielded herself in a way she thought necessary and damned her name in a way that will make the future impossible to navigate smoothly. As for Will, he carries into his recovery the knowledge that he was held as collateral in someone else's fear and experience that will complicate every intimacy and every quiet night. For Bill, there is the shame of having been used and the burden of complicity in a flight that may have been the only option to keep his son alive for the city and the police. The failure to stop Luna will be a stain they are desperate to erase. In the end, Luna's escape asks the cruel, unanswerable questions soap operas love to leave blazing in the viewers' throats. Can a mother who uses terror to protect her child ever be forgiven? And will the law ever be able to see the child outside of the crime? Does the safety of a child outweigh the trauma inflicted on another? Will the Forresters bury the scandal for the sake of the child's future, or will they fight to drag Luna back into the light and force a reckoning? The plane's contrail cuts a pale line across a vast, indifferent sky, and the world divides into those who pity Luna and those who condemn her, those who see a survival instinct and those who see a criminal mind. For now, as the engines roar and passports change hands and the newborn sleeps unaware, the question remains raw and unsatisfied: has Luna escaped successfully? The answer is not tidy. She may have crossed a border, but the shadow of what she did will follow her like a passenger on any flight and accusation, a memory, a hunger for stability she cannot buy. The drama will not allow a clean escape, for nothing here is neat. Luna has run, but she has not outrun consequence, and the fallout, legal, familial, emotional, will play out in every glance, every interview, every tear for months to come, leaving everyone to wonder which part of the story will end first: the hunt for justice, the need for mercy, or the desperate human need to protect one's child at any cost. After days of silence, darkness, and whispered threats wrapped in trembling breaths, Luna did the one thing no one expected. She let Will go. Somewhere deep in a cold, unfamiliar corner of Europe, still foggy from the long flight, still shaking from the weight of everything she had done, Luna stood on a quiet roadside in the early morning mist and looked at Will with the eyes of a woman who had unraveled completely and tried to sew herself back together with desperation. "This is the last good thing I'll do for you," she said, her voice raw, her arms cradling the sleeping infant like a shield and a surrender all at once. Will, eyes bloodshot and mind spinning from days of psychological captivity, stared back in disbelief. He thought she'd never let him go. He thought she might end it all right there, in some back alley of a foreign land. But Luna wasn't looking for death. She wasn't even looking for absolution. She was looking for escape. "I don't want to kill you," she whispered, the truth cutting through the fog between them. I never did. I just didn't know what else to do. I couldn't go to prison. I couldn't lose my baby. You were the only leverage I had. But I'm done now." She reached into her coat and tossed a passport toward him. "Go home. Take care of my baby." Will blinked, confused. "Your baby." Luna's expression tightened. "Our baby," she corrected. "But you're the one who can raise her now. I won't be able to, not with what I've done. I know they'll find me eventually. I know this won't end in peace. But if I vanish long enough, if I become someone else, maybe she have a chance." And with that, Luna turned and walked away, fading into the shadows of a street still waking up, leaving Will standing there, frozen, baby in his arms, heartbeat pounding. The authorities picked Will up hours later. He gave his statement, some of it detailed, some of it blurred with trauma. Interpol got involved. International warrants were discussed. Luna's name was added to lists that made travel impossible without drawing attention. But by then, she was already gone, another face in a crowd, a woman with a new name and a false past, slipping into the maze of Europe's underground. Back in Los Angeles, news of Will's release and safe return exploded across every media outlet. The headlines were explosive. Will Spencer held hostage overseas, released by fugitive Luna. But inside the Spencer family, the noise was more personal. When Bill heard that Will was safe, a storm collapsed inside him. Rage, fear, relief, all of it burned through him in a single exhale. He saw Will, hugged him, broke down in a way no one ever saw from Dollar Bill Spencer. But once the relief passed, the fury returned. Not just at the trauma his son had endured, but at Luna, at the woman who had hijacked his son's life and left scars that therapy wouldn't easily erase. And yet Will told him everything. About how Luna fed the baby at night with shaking hands. About how she cried when she thought Will was asleep. About how she asked him if he thought she was evil. About how she said the only reason she let him go was because the baby deserved a future that didn't begin in violence. About how she begged him, one night, not to hate her, but to understand. Bill listened. He clenched his jaw. He paced. He punched a wall. And then he sat in silence, staring at nothing for a long time. The truth was undeniable. Luna had done something unforgivable. But she had also given his son his life back. And she had trusted Will with something precious. A child. A daughter. His granddaughter. That changed everything. Bill Spencer had power, resources, and the fury of a man whose family had been violated. But now he had something else. A stake in the life Luna tried to protect. He looked at the baby so small, so unaware of the chaos surrounding her, and something inside him shifted. She wasn't just a consequence. She was a chance. Steffi, Ridge, and the Foresters, when they heard the news, were quick to draw lines in the sand. Luna was an enemy, a criminal, a danger. They didn't want the child near their world. They didn't want the scandal staining their family name. But Bill didn't care what the Foresters thought. This wasn't about image. It wasn't about business. It was about blood. And he was going to make sure the child had a home, a future, and a name that meant something. Still, forgiveness for Luna was another matter. Will, recovering from the trauma and holding his daughter for the first time with shaking hands, had more compassion than most expected. He didn't forgive her easily. He wasn't blind to what she'd done. But he saw the pain in her eyes. He saw how broken she was. And he saw how fiercely she loved that baby. Dad, he told Bill one night, I don't think she wanted any of this to happen. She wasn't trying to be evil. She was terrified. She just wanted to survive. Bill's voice was quiet but sharp. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, Will said, but it explains it. For weeks, Bill wrestled with the question. Could he forgive Luna? Should he? He consulted with lawyers. He used his connections to track her movements in Europe. Every update only reminded him how close she had come to destroying everything. But then he'd see that child asleep in Will's arms. Innocent, blameless, a symbol of both disaster and hope. Bill began to understand that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean excusing. It meant choosing not to let rage define what came next. So when the call finally came, when a European contact told him they had eyes on Luna, that they could apprehend her within 48 hours if he gave the order Bill paused, he looked at the photograph of his granddaughter on his desk. He thought about the moment Will walked through the door alive. He thought about what Luna had said before she disappeared. And he said, let her go for now. He didn't tell anyone. Not even Will. Not yet. Because even though Luna was a fugitive, even though she had committed crimes that deserved justice, she had also made a choice that saved his son. And that baby deserved a chance at peace, at a future where people made decisions not just out of punishment, but out of love. Bill wasn't ready to forgive her fully. Maybe he never would. But in that moment, with the world watching, he made a choice that would shape the future of every person in this story. He chose mercy, and somewhere across the ocean, Luna sat alone with a burner phone in one hand and a fake passport in the other, staring at a photograph of her baby, the last one she took before she let her go. She knew she could never return. She knew her name was now a warning and her face a target. But she also knew one thing for sure. She had given her daughter a shot at life. And in her heart, that was enough. For now.